third lecture in the FLOS lecture series. Today, we have the great pleasure to have Alberto Camplani among us. And it's embarrassing to have to present Alberto because many of you know him already and he's widely internationally renowned. So I will anyways give a presentation because perhaps the younger people and among you would need it, but he, as I said, hardly needs a presentation. Allow me anyways to briefly retrace his splendid academic cursus honorum. He teaches early Christian literature at La Sapienza, University of Rome, and has been frequently invited to teach at the École Pratique des Hautes Études. He was a disciple of Manlio Simonetti and Tito Orlandi, and along with the encyclopedic knowledge of early Greek and Latin Christian literature that has always been a standard in Simonetti's school, he particularly specialized in the history of late antique Egyptian Christianity and of Coptic literature, but also in early Syriac literature. In both fields, Egyptian Christianity and Syriac Christianity, he has left a durable trace. In Syriac literature with his groundbreaking studies on Bardaisan of the late 90s. Bardaisan is an author on whom is constantly returning and enriching his ever-growing reflections, but also with articles on Afrahat or on 6th and 7th century Persian monasticism. In the field of Egyptian Christianity, with his seminal study and translation of Athanasius's Festal letters from Coptic and Syriac, and with his numerous studies on history and the self-representation of the Alexandrian Patriarchate in late antiquity, touching upon such diverse topics in this field as Alexandrian ecclesiastical historiography, the Meletian schism, canonical literature and hagiography in Coptic, and the reconstruction of the works of Timothy Aelurus. Incursions in the territories of late antique Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and magic are far from stranger to his scientific interests. Suffice it to mention his Italian translation and commentary, Hermetic writings in Coptic, Scritti Hermetici in Copto, among which the treatise on the Ogdoad and the Ennead preserved in Nag Hammadi Codex 6.6. More recently, he has also devoted his efforts to the investigation of the Bodmer Codex of Visions. In the last years, the indefatigable Professor Camplani is also actively serving the world community of the historians of late antique Christianity through his direction of the Journal Adamantius, after having directed for years another historical journal, the Studi e Materiali di Storia delle Religioni. He's also directing another series, Letteratura della Siria Cristiana of Paideia Publishers, which has been very important for the diffusion of the knowledge of Syriac Christianity in Italy, but also abroad. So Alberto today is going to talk on Timothy Aelurus and his impact on Florilegia production and Christological disputes. He has also provided us with a bibliography that he authorized me to circulate. I will post it in the chat. Hopefully it should work because last time there was some problem. So I will try to post it and you'll tell me whether it works. So. Second. Okay. Okay. Can you see it? It's uploaded in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So that's a short bibliography for your perusal. Then it's a pleasure to leave the floor to you.
Yes.
Alberto, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for being here. I am glad to participate for the second time to the FLOS activities. I was in Venice more than 1 year ago, before the pandemic crisis. And I'm glad to be here because I believe that this is a very good project that has a long future and a very good methodological reflection. Excuse me, but there are here some works in my house, and I cannot avoid this kind of
noises.
Noise here, but okay, I will share my my PowerPoint presentation and tell you why I'm speaking about Timothy. Here should be my presentation. Do you see it?
Yes.
Yes. The title is yes, is a little different from what from the one I gave to Emiliano, but it is clear that I'm my research began, I think, 30 years ago when I met for the first time in my life Timothy Aelurus when I was studying the Vestal Letters of Athanasius. Why was he was so important for me? Because there are a lot of quotations of Athanasius of Alexandria in his works, and in particular there is a very original approach to the Vestal Letters of Athanasius, which are quoted with not only the order they have in the collections of Vestal Letters, but also with the date. And this was extraordinarily important because allowed me to give a new perspective, a new chronology of the Vestal Letters of Athanasius. That is a very discussed question. And yes, from that time, you understand that Timothy is at the center of my attention, both in Armenian and in Syriac. Unfortunately, I began studying Armenian with Van Esbroek, so a lot of years ago, but I I have no command of this language, so I could not check all the texts that should be necessary to understand quite deeply his literary heritage. But I think that today I would like to face one problem, that is the witness of one Florilegium that is well known, that is the Florilegium number 12,156 additional of the British Library. I will show you some photos that were taken by Emiliano Fiori. I will take into consideration, for comparative reasons, also the Axiomite collection, as well as other collections, Ethiopic collections. Why? Because they can give a comparative view of Timothy's letters. And there is something new about this that I would share with you. Thanks above all to Alessandro Bausi, that is my partner in a long research that was invented and created by him, and which is a new research about some manuscripts in Ethiopic collections that are rich in patristic testimonies and rich in texts that can be compared to the one which I'm discussing. Here I will move to the next slide. What are the main points of my paper? How to reconstruct Timothy's literary heritage from manuscripts containing works attributed to him, and particularly Florilegia. Second, an excerpted precautions to be taken by scholars when facing the Florilegia. This is particularly interesting for the British Library witness. The third point, it is a point of about contents, but it is limited to the importance of those contents for the tradition of the writings by Timothy. That is, between theology and discipline, Timothy theological tradition, ancient ecclesiastical customs, the witness of Severus of Antioch on Timothy, that is something of great importance. That is to know, that is to say that we cannot understand completely the Florilegia without taking into account one of the main users of Florilegia, that is Severus of Antioch, that was not only a compiler of Florilegia, but also he was very aware of the risks that ancient theologians could run when using Florilegia. And the fourth point is where is Timothy's history? I would share one of my mistakes in the past research. That is a typical mistake tied to the Florilegia. A Florilegium is a lot of quotations that are together collected. At the same time, there is an author of the Florilegium that we should consider, an author that is able also to organize the knowledge, and to organize the knowledge through what? Through not only subdivisions of the text, but also through titles. And those titles are these titles, the titles of the work from which he is quoting, or are the titles that he's giving in that moment for his activity of organizing the material he's giving. For me, this is one of the methodological problems that concerns Florilegia. We discussed it a lot also in Venice 2 years ago, one year ago, about the problem of what is a Florilegium, if there is a distinction between the manuscript that is conveying the Florilegium and the Florilegium itself. I think that my inquiry and my study of the British Library 12/156 demonstrates that it is important for a scholar to understand, to hypothesize that the single sections of a manuscript can be derived from different Florilegia. That those Florilegia can be the result of not only a library that is quoted, but also of other Florilegia. So there is an internal history of Florilegia that is to be imagined, to be hypothesized. And only at that point, when we have a model of interpretation, we can use Florilegia also for the study of the author that is quoted. As you will see in a moment, there is a problem from that point of view. That is, Florilegia, for example, this famous manuscript has not been well edited. It was edited in piece. In a moment, I will show you the problem. I now would introduce a moment, only our protagonist, that is Timothy, and with only 2 or 3 points of chronology. His life, he was the priest of Cyril and Dioscorus, and this is very important because he was part of the Alexandrian clergy. And I think that this position granted him for the future the possibility to have access to a great library that was the library of the Chancery of Alexandria. It is for that reason then when we study Timothy, Aelurus, Florilegia, we see in them a lot of false attributions, a lot of traditional quotations that you find also in Cyril, in the Apollinaristic traditions, and so on. But there are a lot of original quotations that can derive from the library of the Chancery of Alexandria. And for us, this is very important. So his being a part of the clergy of Alexandria is very important in the first phase of his life. Granted him also during his exile the possibility to quote and to write great works of theology that are works based on the idea of tradition. That is, Alexandria has to defend orthodoxy through the quotation of tradition. So you see that he was present at the Second Council of Ephesus. Then he assisted to the defeat of Dioscorus during the Council of Chalcedon, and during the years after he was consecrated bishop in 457, in the same month when Proterius, the Chalcedonian bishop, was another priest of Cyril, was murdered. He was sent immediately in exile to Gangra and recalled by the Emperor Basiliscus in 475. That is, we have a longer exile, 16 years of exile. When with the second access to the power by Zeno, he lived a moment of difficulty, but the death prevented him from being exiled a second time. The places where he was exiled was Gangra and Chersonesos. Gangra is the same place where Dioscorus was exiled after the Council of Chalcedon, and where he died. This is a point very important because the rhetoric of Timothy in his works, in his quoted works, is based also on the fact that he's a successor of Dioscorus on the same see, same episcopal see, but his successors also in exile, in his life as a defender of the traditional Christology of Alexandria. Here I would like only to show you 2 pages, and then we pass to the more technical problems. That is the final part of the Coptic history of the Church. You should take into consideration that these pages were published by Cram and then by Orlandi, and Orlandi has demonstrated that this was part of a history of the Church composed in the second part of the 5th century or first part of the 6th century in Alexandria. And here we have some passages concerning, you see here in Coptic, Mentis Nos and Historia, the 12th Historia of the Church of Alexandria, where the last figure to be treated, to be discussed, is Timothy of Alexandria. And his peaceful relationship with Timothy Solofasciolus, a very strange history. Philippe Brodeau has published something about this, and above all about Liberatus of Carthago, that discusses Timothy's death and Timothy's activity. This final part of the Coptic text must be quoted because it is very interesting. For me, is a sign that not all the so-called Miaphysite church was so strict. I think it was also disposed to a dialogue with the other side. What says the Coptic text of which I showed the images? Dioscorus, about to die in exile, had recommended that Saint Timothy should become bishop in his place. He was a man from God, full of the wisdom of God, who had a love for the Orthodox faith. After he sat on the throne and became Archbishop of Alexandria, Leo became emperor after Marcion. He was heretic and sent word to Saint Timothy: if you want to stay on your throne, you must adhere to the sign of Chalcedon. And after Timothy refused, the emperor sent him into exile. So here the text is following what we know about the life of Timothy, and placed Pescioi as bishop, that is Timothy, so the so-called Timothy Solofasciolus. This one probably was bishop in the reign of Leo, and many communicated with him. This is said also by other historians, because they knew he was Orthodox. The second Timothy is not so Chalcedonian in his outlook, but many did not communicate with him because he sat on the throne of Timothy while the latter was still alive. Shaw sent many gifts to Timothy in exile, an eulogy: thine is the throne, I'm under you. So it is a very strange story. It is clearly an invented story, but here it is written by someone belonging to the anti-Chalcedonian church who is disposed to have a discussion, a point of compromise, a meeting with the other side. We will see how this point is very important, because one of the main point of my speech is that Timothy's attitude towards the Chalcedonian is a very open attitude, and for that he was criticized. And he was supported in the years to come by Severus of Antioch, that has the same position, and who quotes Timothy also on this point of discipline. I will come back to this point. Excuse me, I only ask to stop the works in my house only a moment, because for me it's very difficult. Excuse me, it is impossible to face the problem, but I hope you are hearing, you are listening to my lecture, or is
don't worry, Alberto. I think it's less annoying to us than to you.
Yeah. Yes.
Because you have it directly in your ears.
Yes, yeah, I had directly in my ears. So excuse me, but this is a typical feature of our times. What are the sources of Timothy's works? We have some translations and we have quotations of the works of Timothy. Zacharias of Mytilene is one of our main witnesses about him. It is a compilation, a series of compilation of a work written in Greek by Zachariah from Mytilene. We have a lot of works about this kind of historiographical activity. I would mention only one point, that is Blodeau's analysis of Pseudo-Zacharias of Mytilene. He's not a serialist, but he well perceived one problem, that Timothy is at the center of the vision of the kind of work. So Alexandria and Timothy are the main protagonist of the historiographical vision of Zacharias of Mytilene. That is, Alexandria has the right to have the religious power in the Roman Empire of the East. Is the best candidate. It is not Constantinople, but it is Alexandria that deserves to be recognized as the main leading city, the main leading community for what concerns the religious matters of the Roman Empire of the East. In Zachariah, we have a lot of quotations, and quotations also of his letters, on which we will come back in a moment. Blodeau said in his work on Constantinople at Alexandria that the position of Timothy in Zacharias' work is the same as Dionysius in Dionysius of Alexandria in Eusebius' history. And I think that this comparison is a good one, because also in the case of Dionysius, we have quotations of letters by Eusebius which are capital for the historian of Christianity. Then we have Rufus Plerothoris, in which, and this I anticipate a point that will be discussed at the end, the Ecclesiastica Historia of Timothy is discussed. We should ask ourselves, what is this Ecclesiastica Historia? Then we have the testimony of the British Library that I will discuss longer. Then we have two works in Armenian translation that were published at the beginning of the 20th century. The Widerlegung, the great work of Timothy on the unity of God and of Christ against the Council of Chalcedon, and the Armenian Sigillum Fidei that should be part of I think Emiliano's work, because it is a great Florilegium in Armenia with a capital quotations of a lot of fathers that are not preserved in Greek or Syriac Florilegia, or there are parallels, but it's very regional. Then we have a siloge of Timothy's works, letters in particular, in the Axiomite collection. You see that there is a work by Bausi on the Axiomite collection that was published in 2006 in Adamantius. I will mention and show the bibliographical reference. Why it is so important? Because we have the possibility to have a new letter of Timothy that was not known to us, but not completely new, because Timothy is a writer who quotes a lot. So I discovered with the help of Alessandro's translation that the new letter quotes a creed that is known in the British Library additional 12/156. Then we have Coptic materials. There are a lot of 2 or 3 homilies attributed to Timothy. They are not by Timothy, but because Timothy becomes in Coptic tradition one of the great point of reference of the Orthodoxy. He's a bishop who was exiled. He fought for his ideas, etc. So there are a lot of homilies that are connected, in particular, with the Pachomian environments. And this is very interesting because we know, if you know Göring's works, we know that the Pachomians were divided in two tendencies. One was pro-Chalcedonian and the other was anti-Chalcedonian. I will skip this, and yes, we have also fragments in Greek. We don't have real titles. The problem of title has been discussed a lot. My teacher is Tito Orlandi, who devoted a great part of his work to the problem of titles. And there are two researchers that are Paola Buzzi and Emanuele Castelli that are working a lot of the problem of titles. We should pay attention to the problem of a title because Florilegia give us an idea of a title that is very different from ours. And this is one of the main points I'm discussing. But in Armenian, the great work published by Mekerchan in Armenian, there is a long title for one of the two great works devoted by Timothy to the Council of Chalcedon, concerning the affirmation that our Lord and God Jesus Christ is one along with his flesh, and the attribution to the same of all divine and human things, and that having been made consubstantial with us, he remained even thus God, and that it is blasphemy to divide him into two natures. So this is a very long title in the Armenian tradition. We will see that the same treatise in Syriac has a more compact title. It is probably to this work that we have some references in Greek, but unfortunately they don't give an exact title to this great work. For example, Schwarz published in Drei Dogmatische Schriften Justinians 3 references to this work: Ento ogdo kefalaio tu tritu biblio operan Chersoni synegrapse. You see that the work was composed when he was in Cherson. That is the second part of his exile. Timothy was exiled to Gangra as Dioscorus. Then, in a second moment, was sent to Chersonesos, that was still far from the civilized world. Ento tetarto autu kefalaio tu eremenu tritu biblio, ento deutero ton antireticon. So we don't have very precise titles. Here in Armenian, you see we have this publication. You will see also in the bibliography the great publication about that is based on only on 1 or 2 manuscripts. So there are a lot of problems. The only index we have is an index giving, as you see here, all the testimonies that are quoted. You see that this treatise by Timothy is composed by testimonies. Only here and there are personal authorial developments. You see how long is this index. It was the work of other scholars, Le Bon, Schwarz, to identify the main part of those quotations that are here registered only as they appear in the text. So, in a sense, the index that you find at the beginning of the Armenian edition of the works Widerlegung of Timothy is also what you have as the content, as regards the contents of the work. But Schwarz, in his magisterial work, Codex Vaticanus Graecus, eine anti-Chalcedonische Sammlung aus der Zeit Kaiser Zenos. That is one of the masterpieces of Schwarz. He proposed an analysis of this Codex Vaticanus Graecus 431, which involved also a comparative analysis of Timothy work preserved in Armenian and partly, as we will see, in Syriac. This is very interesting because, and also he proposed an analysis of the first part of this work preserved in Syriac. Demonstrating one fact that this codex that is preserved in the Vatican See and which speaks in Greek, not very good things about Chalcedon, and it's very interesting from for this. This codex is the product of environments that are close to Timothy and to Peter Mongus, that was the successor of the Miaphysital line of bishops in Alexandria. So you will find a lot of quotations, a great Florilegium that is based in part on the activity of Cyril, Dioscorus, and above all Timothy, Aelurus, that had a particular skill in quoting texts. Now we pass to the main part of the most important point of my speech, that is Timothy Aelurus in the British Library, additional 12,156. Here also this has been in part published. It is a pity, a real pity, that we don't have all the text published in one publication or in 2 or 3 publications corresponding to the main section of the text, because this has provoked a lot of misunderstandings. I think that one of the great ideas of the ERC by Emiliano is to take Florilegia as texts, as macro texts, that have their own life. I will demonstrate how it is important for this, kind of work. It is only at the second or third level of analysis that we can use the single quotations to study the authors. But before, we have to work a lot to understand the subdivision, the great subdivision of the manuscript, the Florilegia, the plurality of Florilegia that are preserved in the manuscripts, and so on. So we have to make an analytical approach in a lot of stages. I will propose some observations at the end. So we have, what do we have in this manuscript? We have, first of all, the same treatise that we preserved in Armenian, but pay attention, compiled, reworked, and in a sense, shortened. Not only this, but we will see, and this for me is the most important thing, there are signs, the typical grammar of Florilegia, that are intervening in our manuscript. That is, subtitle or headings, as Paola Buzzi suggests to say in this case. Headings that say, for example, from Timothy, here on we have the description of the history of Chalcedon. And after other words, another quotation. So we have here the strange situation of a great work that is reworked. It is a compilation of quotations, because Timothy's style is to alternate the long strings of quotations and shorter intervention from his own part that are of historical or only rarely theological content. So we have here a manuscript that is a Timothean manuscript or a Timothean collection, where also Timothy's works are a product, are the result of are excerpta. As you see, the title is shorter, of Timothy Against Those Who Say Two Natures. There is also one subtitle that is of the Saint Timothy, Archbishop of Alexandria, history, at page 11, so at the middle of the tractate. History. And again, he says against the synod. We will come back of this, but you see, here we have two sections of the Armenian tractate. We can check this fact, and not a continuous text. And this means that also Timothy, who is quoting other author, is the object of a Florilegium, is himself becoming part of the Florilegium. Then we have at pages 29, 39, the collections of letters and creeds, beautiful collections. Here are letters that are written by Timothy a little before and after his exile, and in which he exhorts his clergy and his faithful people to fight for orthodoxy, and also suggest a moderate attitude towards those who adhered to Chalcedon when they wanted to re-enter, to become part of the church. The great problem becomes give a new baptism or not, give a new consecration or not to priests that are coming back to orthodoxy. The collection of letters occupies the folia 29 and 39. It has been edited quite well. So it is not edited because there is the reproduction of the manuscript in Evid and Wickham. And then in page 3961, there is another work by Timothy against, of course, what? Against the definition of the Council of Chalcedon and the Tome of Leo. These are the two main issues that are faced by Timothy. And unfortunately, this work has been edited also only in part, as you see. No, edited the first part, then Evid and Wickham, the second part in the Festschrift for Alberto van Rooij after Chalcedon. And then there are quotations from the famous Council of Ephesus II of 449 that are still unedited. They has been translated, they haven't been used, but you see that here those editions don't give a good service to understand a work that was composed by the quotations of the definition of Chalcedon and the Tome of Leo, followed point by the answer and the refusal by Timothy. So when you, why at a certain point there were the quotations of the so-called Robber Sidon or Latrutinium Ephesinum, because by this Timothy wanted to show to all the readers that a lot of bishops who adhered to the Second Council of Ephesus of 449 were able to completely change their mind in the Council of Chalcedon. In particular, one of the la bête noire of Timothy's Juvenal of Jerusalem. Then you see there are various extracts that are with a Timothean connection. That is the formulation of repentance by Anastasius that is presented here as an example of a declaration for people that are who adhered to Chalcedon and now are desiring to come back to, are willing to come back to the church. Timothy's prayer for those who convert to Orthodoxy, and Timothy's creed sent to the Emperor Leo through the Comes Rusticus. That is the same creed to which a reference is now to be read in the new letter discovered in Ethiopic. And then a lot of consideration of Timothy about his own exile. So we have here a lot of materials that are not part of the two works that are quoted in excerpts in the first part of the manuscript, but extracts coming from works that are preserved probably in the chancery of Alexandria. Then we have the famous Florilegium Decenum that was published by Rucker, with a very beautiful study at the beginning, a very famous work with epistle by Rabula, Ribas, and a typical Florilegium. And on page 80-91, extra from the works of Diodorus of Tarsus, Theodore of Mopsuestia, Nestorius, which are not completely tied to Timothy, but could be part of his arsenal, of his tools. You know that one of the skills of Timothy is to be able to quote not only his own tradition, his own theological tradition, but to have a good command about the materials of his enemies, and thus is mediated through Cyril of Alexandria. But I think that here and there also Timothy was able to gather some materials. Then we have the second part of the Codex. You see from page 91, 136, it is a normal Florilegium without a clear design for the moment, the clear outline for the moment. We have the colophon, we have the important declaration that the Codex was donated in the year 562. So we have also the date before which the Codex was written. So it is a very ancient Codex. I think if Emiliano is agree with me, is one of the most ancient Syriac Florilegia. And yes, now we have to make some considerations about what I have shown to you. What was the main problem, the main concerns of scholars in the 20th century? It was quite obvious. It was to see all the quotations, to search for ancient texts and the pro works from which they derive. For example, we have a quotation by Dionysius of Melito. There is a long line of patristic quotations that are very important. Of course, the scholars of the 20th century were very aware of also of the false texts that were circulating in the Miaphysite text, the Apollinarist productions. No idea of the grammar of Florilegia or of their internal subdivisions. The question of a common or diverse origin of the individual sections in which the context of the manuscript may be divided should be more underlined, should be more treated. Now I would like to show what is what are the signs in the manuscript which tell us something about the history and the prehistory of this different Florilegia. We divided the manuscript in two parts. The first part with a title, book composed by Timothy, Bishop of Alexandria, against the wicked sin of Chalcedon, Ctavada, Beda, Lemor, Timotheus, Episcopal Alexander, Lucval, Synodus Certo, the Chalcedoni. No? You see that this is a very general title that does not correspond to any of the titles of the single works that are in the manuscript. So could be the general title of the original Florilegium that was included in the manuscript. At page 91, here ends the book of the refutation. Here we have a Schreier of the wicked synod, which was assembled at Chalcedon. It was composed by the Venerable Mark Timothy, Bishop of Alexandria. This is not true, because at page 91 we have in fact the conclusion of the Florilegium and the Senum that could be tied to environments of the Miaphysite Church, yes, but it is not the product of Timothy. So here you see we have the title activity of someone who is gathering more than one Florilegium and giving the main outline through this title. The title is an organizer of knowledge. It is not something that is tied to the single work, and this is very clear. Other facts should be emphasized. In the Syriac version of the first text, we have a title that is a treatise of Timothy against those who say to natures. That is the first, the one who is parallel to the Greek. We have also a current title. I will show you in through the photos given me by Emiliano. Softwater, the Bahoto, Lukval, Ailenum Rin, Trentianin. That is, it is not a title, but in the same hand of the manuscript, we have the idea that we have this part of the manuscript is composed by testimonies of the fathers. But here we have also another title, another note that we found below in the manuscript, written in another style, in another script, that is a book of disputations. So a manuscript like 12,156 is to be interpreted, because there are a lot of levels of analysis we should take into account. But another point that I anticipated a few minutes ago, at page, volume 11, we have of the Holy Timotheus, who was Archbishop of Alexandria, history. And again, he speaks against the synod. So we have an interruption and a new beginning from the same work. We can check this with the Armenian. In the Armenian, you find only the text before and after, with a point that has been skipped out. And here, what I would like to know, and what it is also the history of my mistake, is to interpret history as a title. So all what follows that was published by No is a history of Chalcedon, of the deaths of Nestorius, etc. That could be assimilated to a historical work of the kind of Historia Arianorma of Athanasius. But in fact is not, is part of the same work that is of the Holy Timotheus about those against those who say to natures. So here we have the trace of the activity of the acceptor. At page in volume 12 verso, we have the typical expression that you find thousands of times in Florilegia, and both are chroniotho. That is after other things. You see here you have the current title. Sottuoto, Dabahoto, Lukvaila, Lenda Marina, Tranchianin. Here you have the later note at the below. And here you have something that at the first sight, this is important for me, at first sight could be interpreted as one of the red rubrics that are so present in the manuscript. The style is the same, it is red, but the particularity is that it is the Jose Timotheus, Dahuo, Risha, Vescoff, etc. That is, here our compiler is saying, I skipped some texts and I begin again from this point where a history is narrated. When some years ago I interpreted this rubric in evidently not checking the Armenian as the announce of a text, a new text of the history that I was searching for. The grammar of Florilegia is different for our grammar. Not all the titles we find in Florilegia are the titles of works. They can serve a function inside the Florilegia and not giving some bibliological information in the modern sense of the term. At page yes, the second work is announced as you see in a very traditional way. Saint Timothy, Archbishop of Alexander's rebuttal, Maxanuta of and answer to Schroyer, the definition given the Chalcedon, so that its readers may know that the Synod of the Chalcedon ordained nothing other than the prevalence and proclamation in all God's churches of the profane dogmas of Nestorius. So this is the second treatise that is normally introduced by a long title. And at page 62, after the letters, and after this treatise, we find Confession of Faith of Saint Timotheus, which was sent to the Emperor Leo through the Comes Rusticus, and history, which is in part. I would like to have suggestion about the translation, because we have Tesharita, the Bapnotho, how can be translated in extras, partial history, or translated some history, but no, I don't know if it is not a real translation. About those events that happened to him after in that way. So we have here, after this title, we have this declaration sent to the emperor through the Comes Rusticus. Then we have a little history about Timothy, that after sending this declaration, he was exiled. The scene is the same I find in Athanasius Apologia Secunda, when Athanasius is exiled by Constantine, the first Christian emperor, thanks to the denounce of the Eusebians bishops. So the kind of reference for me is clear. That is, Athanasius is the great inspiring historian and pamphleteer. Now we pass in the second part, and I will be more rapid, quick. Dear Emiliano, I don't know if I have 5 minutes. 10 minutes.
Well, 5 minutes, yes.
5 minutes, yes.
7 minutes.
Okay.
Don't be too.
Okay, I here only to make you known that we have the other testimony that is the Ethiopic tradition of on the letters of Timothy, and what I'm searching about the history of Timothy. I have shown those photos a lot of times, and so I will not stop on these photos. Here we have a collection that has a lot of texts, and I would like only to mention 2 texts. That is one with the history of the Episcopate of Alexandria that has been published by Alessandro and myself in Adamantius 216. And here, this is inedited, the Epistle 70 of Cyprian of Carthage. In fact, Alessandro published other version, other manuscripts that contain this epistle, but they have not a premise that is very important. Then you have a typical structure of canonical liturgical compositions with a lot of things of great importance. For example, a treatise on the unity of God, that is a new patristic work, the apostolic tradition, so the prayers for baptism and so on. But in particular, I have to stop the Syllogy of Timotheus Aelurus with the Epistle to the Alexandrians, the Epistle to the Constantinopolitans, the 12 chapters of Cyril of Alexandria. It is interesting to see that the 12 chapters are of Cyril, yes, but there is something to do with also Timotheus. So Timotheus as excerptor gives also his name to the Syllogy. The 12 chapters are the refutation of the Council of Chalcedon, that is the second treatise of the Syriac manuscript, and the treatise of Gregory of Nazianzus. You see, it is a very complex manuscript. I would like only to show you that for what concerns the letter, it is a new letter to the Alexandrians that is not to be confused with the other letter to the Alexandrians that was published by Abel Wicken. And in the first part of the text of the letter, I have Bauzi provisional translation, but it's not published. So only to say that there is the mention to an epistle sent to the emperor by a certain Rusticus, the Comes Rusticus, that is a part of the bureaucracy of the empire, a member of the bureaucracy of the empire, and that is the same creed that is quoted here. I could verify that the same creed is quoted here that we find in the Syriac manuscript, but there it is the creed. Here it is the letter that speaks about the creed. So it is a letter written by during the exile with a lot of testimonies and patristic testimonies. I end my discussion by pointing the importance of 2 texts. That is, on one side, the problem of the history of Timothy. This work was part of other works or was an independent work? I think it was an independent work. And was my mistakes what? To attribute to a piece of another work to this history. But this history is mentioned also by other John Rufus and Severus of Antioch, and there was a history that probably inserted the Nestorius and the history of Ephesus in the long period of the church from the 4th century on. Using what? Also in this case, I'm sure Timothy was using the pre-existing histories, and one is the one we published some years ago, the so-called HEPA. And here we have a quotation from the HEPA. So Timotheus' history was a kind of a florilegium of histories. Severus says about this history, the Holy Timothy, the one of the Dioscorus, teaches in the book of history that it was not for heresy that he was expelled from the church, but because he was angry for the reason that the Holy Peter had excommunicated the Meletians from the church for the great multitude of their misdeeds. And Peter had not accepted their baptism. On the other hand, the Meletius was not charged with heresy in that time, but for having dared to make imposition of hands in the diocese of Athens. And this is the real historical explications made by Severus and Timothy. And it is now accepted by the historians. Meletius was not an Arian. No? And this is the first point. The second point is the problem of rebaptism that you see here present. Clearly, here is the passage. I discovered this passage in British Library 12/155 some years ago in the festschrift for Tito Orlandi. The other point is the problem of rebaptism, of pardon, of reconsecration. We know that in both sides of the struggle, there was of the fight of the controversy, there were extremists that probably favored the idea that the clergy should be reconsecrated and the faithful should be rebaptized. But this was not the line of Timothy. This is clear in all his letters. And this is also the line that we find in Severus of Antioch. But both are well aware of the fact that Cyprian and Peter of Alexandria rebaptized heretics. You know the Cyprian's letter 70. Why it was quoted? It was quoted because customs must be quoted, but custom can change in the history of the church. And this is an intuition that is very clear in Timothy. Timothy used the history of the Alexandrian episcopate and quoted from there. Quoted two facts. One was the rite of consecration of Bishop of Alexandria that were ordained and consecrated by presbyters. It was an old use that was reformed during the 4th century. And Severus and Timothy knew that there was a reform of this because ecclesiastical customs must change. The same was the problem of Cyprian. Cyprian was a great martyr, but also his strictness in recommending the rebaptism was to be changed because customs are changing, and Timothy and Severus were of this opinion, and they put this opinion in the so-called history that exists but must not be confounded with the histories that are mentioned in the Florilegia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for this tour de force through Timothy Aelurus and his tradition. It was extremely rich, both in terms of methodology. Thank you for all your references and partially confirmations to intuitions of this project, of the FLOS project. And it was impressive because it's the first time for me, at least, that I have am exposed to such an orderly presentation but at the same time so problematic presentation of the tradition of Timothy Aelurus. Before asking any question myself, I open the floor for the discussion to the audience. please write in the chat or raise hands graphically, or just open the mic and jump in. Okay, I have Luc van Rompuy, whom I see with the raised hand.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh. Alberto, this was a fantastic overview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have one small comment and I have a question. My comment is, and I'm sure you know about it, there is an article by Louisa Abramovsky, I think it goes back to 1987, in which she argues strongly for publishing the whole manuscript.
Yes.
And treat it as one coherent collection. And in fact, this article has been reprinted very recently in a book, which has a number of her earlier papers, which came out just a few months ago. And there are some further comments, so it may be interesting to go back to it. And in fact, she was, of course, interested, especially in Theodor Mopsuestia, but of course, there are fragments in the same manuscript there. And so that's one thing. Second, I have a question. You mentioned Severus of Antioch, and of course, he has been dealing with Timothy I think in several of his letters. And this was discussed, among other things, by Jonathan Moss in his presentation, which came out a few years ago. But what about Philoxenus of Mabuk? Is it correct that he doesn't have references to Timothy? And what would it tell us about his type of Miaphysite Syriac Christianity?
Yes, it's a very important question. I think that for what I know, Philoxenus is not quoting Timothy, but I should check. I will check in the future. But my impression is that we don't have in all the articles I read, in all the books I read, reference by Philoxenus on Timothy. I think that here really Timothy is very Alexandrian, more than Cyril. Cyril became in a few years an international authority. Not also the same for Timothy, but it is Severus. Severus, yes, is the one who knows. I found yesterday, I was in the library, a reference that was not discovered by others of Severus to the letters I quoted, to the collection of letters. So there are a lot of passages in Severus in which we have a reference to Timothy. I think that he became aware and acquainted with him, especially when he was in Egypt, but also before we have traces of his interest in Timothy. Timothy was well known in Palestinian Miaphysite circles. So yes, John Rufus and other quote him. Strangely, in Philoxenus, I suspect that there is a certain ignorance about him. And this, for me, could be, I will check your suggestion, but it could be a sign of the particularity of his own Miaphysism, that is also studied from other points of view, but his historical position that is not so connected to the main circle, although he was connected with Severus, but he is particular from this point of view. Thank you for the second. I knew of the first edition of the article by Abramovsky, but no, I didn't read the second edition of this article in the collection of studies. I will search for it immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. So further, another question from anyone? So trying to have an overlook, but okay, if Okay, no, Alessandro Bosi is leaving, and thank you, Alessandro, for your presence.
Thank you,
If you're
Alessandro.
still here. Well, if there isn't any other question for the moment, I would try to make up my mind with your suggestions. So basically, you have suggested that that this book of histories should be identified. This is something that I haven't understood exactly. It should be identified with the second major block in 12156, which is against Chalcedon and the Tome of Leo.
No.
No, you don't think so?
No, I don't think so. I think that the writer in British Library is always an indication of the contents of the section that follows. So also when the work is not a historian. It is only in 12155 that we have a piece of the history that is quoted probably by Severus of Antioch, and of course Moss discussed also this passage, and in John Rufus Plerophoris. In John Rufus Plerophoris, there are 3 references to an ecclesiastique. This is a transcribed in Syriac history. And what was the content? Surely there was Nestorius, his death, where Timothy is imitating Athanasius when describing the death of Arius. This is really impressive how Athanasius' work is in the mind of Timothy on the one hand. And the Meletian schism, probably tied to, I think, probably to the problems of, power, ecclesiastical power, forgiveness of apostasy, etc. So I think that we have only those passages, and probably the quotation of Cyprian of Carthage was quoted by Timothy, because Severus, when speaks of Timothy, speaks of and of the system of election of Alexandrian bishops that he found in the history of Alexandria. He speaks also of Cyprian and of Timothy, and this is very interesting. It is only an hypothesis. I don't have very strong arguments, but I think that it can be advanced.
Okay, so this history is a standalone work that is mentioned by and quoted by Rufus and Severus, but is not normally excerpted in these big collections.
No.
Okay.
No. It is quoted by Severus, but not.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question. Thank you very much. I have a question from Philip Fornes.
Yes.
Thank you, Emiliano, and thank you, Alberto, so much for this. This was just a fantastic presentation. I learned so much. I was working. I have a question about the Syriac excerpt, or however Florilegist, or whatever we want to say here. As far as terms, you talked a lot about this first part of the manuscript, about 1, I think, to 29.
Yes.
39, whatever it was. And I was actually working on the second part of the manuscript more recently, so the part that was published by now in Christological Orientalis, and then the later section by Ebede and Wickham. And there I noticed also some of these phrases that when I believe it's the Council of, the definition in Chalcedon will be quoted, and then we'll have a response to Timothy. And the first one says, the first response of the blessed Timothy. Perhaps not something he would write himself. And at the very end, it also uses this men. So from the refutation of Timothy to respond.
Yes, this is a very dangerous manuscript, this one, because you have the problem of the authorial problem is one of the great problems here, because you see that surely the structure of Timothy's work was that is answers to single points of Chalcedon and of Leo's tome. But we don't have, I'm sure that we don't have the complete answers of Timothy. If you check, for example, there are some answers that are very short and rather incomplete and a little, not well argued. On the other, here and there, you find long answers. I think that in one case, you have a shortened answer, so something that has been cut. And yes, you are right. It is when we study this work, the second great theological work of Timothy, we should consider that we don't have it in complete. So in all the manuscript, all the collection between 1 and 92, or I would prefer 69, because Florilegia Medicenum, I think that was secondarily added to the whole. Yes, we should consider that all the works by Timothy are selected, are cut here and there, and and probably here and there the excerptor added a title, a heading. It could be a rubric. I don't know what is the best terminology. So our study must take into account this fact. We don't have the complete until a page. Also in the letters, there is the same phenomenon. One should be very yes. I would like to compare the Ethiopic and the Syriac letter just to see if Botar, Chronioto, how many lines are skipped out in one of the two testimonies. No, it is a very. On the other side, you have a list of quotations, and also there you have to pay to the typical mistakes of Florilegia, that is misattribution due not to mistakes of attribution, but because of the shortening activities. No, okay. So very. But why? Where did you publish your work about this part of the manuscript?
I worked on an English translation just of this first part, coming out in this. What's it? Cambridge edition.
Of early distant text. So
a very small publication. I didn't. I was more curious as I was translating these things. But another question, if I may, Emiliano, is
of course
the first part of this manuscript, though, where we have this what seems to be a compendium of the Armenian work that we have. Is this really just a shortening of the work? I know you weren't comparing it with Armenian as much, but is this just a shortening of the work, or is this drawing from different works of Timothy and putting them together in a new form?
I think not in this. In the first part, it is a shortening of the Armenian work. Now, I understand what is your the other possibility for the moment, and also drawing from what has been written about this. It seems to be there should be no contamination with other works. Okay. But yes, a real comparison will be possible when the Armenian will be translated. My problem was also that I cannot check Armenian no more. So when I was young, yes, but I cannot do everything. And now I remember that it was Manlio Simonetti who said to me when I was very young, I was writing my MA dissertation, Alberto, your next work should be the translation of the Armenian of Timothy Aelurus. So 30 years after you say you see that I didn't dig what.
Thanks so much, Alberto.
Thank you.
Thank you. So further remarks and questions? while waiting for them, possibly I would step in and say something. Well, say something. Discuss at least the Bamnotho, so that history, the Bamnotho. You know, Alberto.
Yes. See, the part. See, what could be.
Which is it? Yes. I found my notes. It's a 62 verse, right?
Yeah.
It's for the letter to the emperor through Rufus and Rusticus. So the Bamnotho, it reminds me of the Menuotho of the Catameros Pistis.
Yes.
Of Gregory Thaumaturgus, and there it is also not completely clear what Catameros means there. It's detailed or partial or brief or one point by one. I have some, and this could apply to the Bamnotho too. Well, the Painsmith says it's partly partial.
Yeah.
So it should be, if we take it at face value from the dictionaries, it would be a partial history.
A partial,
but I'm not completely convinced that it is. So I have no answer. But
my problem is to understand if it is a mark of the excerptor's activity. So that is a partial because I'm taking here and there some phrases.
Yes.
Or it is a partial because it is not a complete history of the period. And there are two interpretations, two possible interpretations of this.
I would tend to understand it as a selection, as a sign of selection.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely not sure.
No, yes, but it could be good because it is really a mark of the activities of the excerptor.
But I invite our audience to give their feedback too, if they have better ideas or more steady ideas than I have. So, and it's I must say it's quite puzzling what we see here in terms of the grammar of the Florilegium. That's a very nice expression you used there, the grammar of Florilegia. And I sometimes because this grammar builds an implicit narrative, so to say, and that's what Florilegia usually do. But the kind of grammar that this Florilegium in 12156 uses is relatively different from what I'm accustomed to with Florilegia of the 8th, 9th century, in 8th, 9th century manuscripts at least, because they are much more regular, much more clear, much clearer in their intentions and strategies. They always say what the excerpted work is, the chapter, the book and the chapter, and they use, of course, all this botar chronioso, this botar, I don't know, tuv and botar sagioso sometimes. So, but they don't seem to use this kind of, and again from the shito of, and it's much more confusing, this kind of rubric writing in this manuscript.
Yes, I would check. It could be interesting to check if those kind of notes are present also in the second part. So, in other terms, if this kind of notes is tied to the excerptor that composed the first part, or is part of activity of the scribe of the manuscript. So I think that we should study a lot. I don't know if Luke Farropai is aware if someone is completing Louise Abramovsky's project or not.
I don't think so. In fact, this new volume which came out, Neue Christologische Untersuchungen, here it is. They do well, she was preparing this edition, but in addition to 12,156, there is another manuscript which has fragments from De Incarnatione, and in fact, that's in I'm sorry about it. And there, someone took her draft and they made some selections and published the text, the Syriac with the translation. And I find it a bit strange because she finished this specific part of the work in 1980, which is 40 years ago. And this is very much a draft. And then there was the Bearbeiter, and he made some corrections and he made some changes. And he says, well, probably she meant this, or probably she made a mistake here, and I want to correct it. So he's very meticulous and very careful, but still, it's very much a draft. But that's the only part in the book, as far as I can see, which has not been published before. So it's new. But
I will check it immediately.
I must say, I have questions about it, because I would not like to see my work drafts published in 50 years from now. So that's, it makes it, of course, it's very important, and whatever she does is always very interesting. But, and then there are some notes, because all the papers which are reprinted have been, there is a new typesetting, and there are all kinds of comments by this Bearbeiter. And I think his name is mentioned somewhere in the introduction, but so he plays a subtle role throughout the volume. So it's certainly an important new publication.
Thank you, Lucas.
Well, I can say that the original form of the project I wrote, the proposal I wrote for this project also foresaw an edition of 12,156. And then I realized that it was unfeasible, and that this would have been penalized by the evaluators. So I simply put it off. But it would be an ambition sometime in life to do it as a follow-up of this project. But still, we don't have a precise plan or schedule to do this. There are other questions for Alberto, or we are all tired and
yes.
I want to stop here. No? Okay, so
I would like to thank all of you, all the listeners. In particular, I would like to thank the people who helped me in preparing this project. That is, in particular, Alessandro Bausi and Emiliano Fiore. So it was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. The pleasure was totally ours. And thank you all in the audience for being here and contributing to the discussion. And we'll meet again next month for the next meeting of the FLOS lectures. There will be we have Georgia Nicosia on the 25th of June. It's right, because I don't have the. Is it right, Georgia? Right. Yes. Who will talk about her in progress research on their Syrian manuscripts and on historiographical excerpts in Syriac. So
thank you.
We are looking forward to it very much. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for being here again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.